Um, I heard somebody a few years back use a word that I think they just made up. I don't think it's a real word, but I guess that's how a lot of words get in certain circles. Anyways, one of those when I heard it, I was like, that's not a real word. Then I thought it was like pretty straightforward, though, I guess, when you think about it. They use the word Christoformity. Christoformity. To talk about what we've been talking about these past couple minutes here. To be formed in the image of Christ, right? Okay, duh, I know. Like, I'm not that smart, but I was listening. Okay, I got it. But what they suggested, and I think it's a pretty important concept, and we've actually touched on it a couple of times a little bit in our discussion about what it means to be a disciple. Christoformity requires cruciformity. Christoformity requires cruciformity. Are you still there in Matthew 10? Keep reading. Verse 34. Jesus, I want to follow you. I want to become like you. That's enough for me. I don't need anything on my bio except Christ is all and in all. Well, here's what it takes. Verse 34. Do not think that I came to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I came to set a man against his father, and to set a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be the members of his household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who has found his life will lose it, and he who has lost his life for my sake will find it. Keep going, Matthew chapter 16. Matthew 16, verse number 24. Matthew 16, verse 24. Then Jesus said to who? His disciples. Not the crowds, not his enemies, his disciples. I hope men like us, men that really are trying to follow Jesus, we're really trying to figure this thing out. If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? Christoformity, becoming like Christ, the whole goal of discipleship, requires cruciformity, to live a life shaped by the cross. Someone else said it this way: when Christ calls a man, he bids him to come and die. When Christ calls a man, he bids him to come and die. And that's what these passages say. I mean, first, of course, in every society, even in our society that kind of, in as many ways possible through economics and socialization, sort of de-emphasizes family ties as being absolutely necessary for survival, even in our society, to be cut off from your family members is death. People even say, that family, they're dead to me, meaning I don't care about them. I'm not connected. They've done something that has separated me from them and they from me. Jesus says, honestly, that may be what it comes to if you're going to follow me. And then he follows it up, just to be clear, you cannot save your life. You got to lose it if you're going to really find it. And then he doubles down on it. Here, he says to his disciples, and we'll talk some more about this conversation here in just a second. He says to his disciples, if you want to come after me, if you want to be like me, if you want to follow me, you must deny yourself. I'm not even a thing anymore. Just like Peter denied Jesus. I don't know the man. That's how we're supposed to be with our own self, our own person. The way Paul would say this, it is no longer I who live, denying himself, but Christ lives in me, which is kind of the continuation of this. Take up the cross and follow me. If we're going to be able to be the men that we're supposed to be, it's going to require that we take up the cross and really follow Jesus. Let me pause here for just a second. And I want us to think, and this one I actually want us to talk about a little bit, but think about it for just a second before we actually kind of dive more deeply into it. What are some of the practical things that kill discipleship? If discipleship is me dying to myself, it is no longer I who live, what are the things that keep us alive? And I mean in the bad way. What are the things that we use to preserve our sense of self in worldly ways, sinful ways, bad habits, bad characteristics, things? And I'd like you to think particularly as men. I guess that may be kind of natural, but let's do that. As men, what are the things that the devil uses to say, you can't take up the cross? You gotta, if you take up the cross, you won't be able to fill in the blank. If you deny yourself and you don't keep being you, then that will mean you can't continue on with whatever. What are some of the things that really kill discipleship, that prevent us? Somebody said something. Pride. Talk about it. Amen, brother.
And so it's a struggle, to try to be as far as the man of God and still hold on to what the world's taught me what a man is. So pride.
And man, that was so well said. All the things that you mentioned, they do come back to that issue. You got to respect me. I got to make sure that you know that I know that I'm somebody. I mean, all these things come back to this, right? This is at the root of all that. I want us to circle back to that. Keep going. Tell me some more habits, characteristics, sins, practices that kill discipleship.
Well, I think one of the biggest dangers for us isn't the things that in and of themselves are sinful, but that we allow to become sinful. For instance, you can justify working to feed your family.
Great.
But you can take that to the point where you work so much that you ignore your family. And you justify it by saying, well, this is the only way I can continue to, make more money and improve life for my family. And I think we all struggle with some of that. With trying to be, to be able to keep up with the level that we think we should be at.
Absolutely. How about the way Jesus would talk about that in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 6 and verses 22 through 24? It would sound a little bit like this. Verse 19 through 21. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Are you treasuring, are you investing yourself in Christ and becoming more like Him and having your family become more like Him? Or to your point, am I investing myself in making as much money as I can to secure our future and all that kind of stuff? A future that moth and rust are going to destroy and fire is going to burn up by the end of all things. Come on. Keep going.
We goes on later in the chapter talking about anxiety.
Great.
Being anxious about what you eat and what you're going to be clothed with, as well as that kind of ties into what Ken was saying, providing for your family.
Greed and anxiety were on my list, right along with pride. Actually, that's kind of the ultimate one to me. But yeah, greed is very closely tied to anxiety right here in this passage. Other discipleship killers, things that take us away, habits, characteristics, sins, etc. Here, then here, and then here. Go ahead.
It might be tied to what Kenneth said, but for me it's a responsibility. Like I feel a responsibility to people, for things, to my wife, to my parents, and that responsibility can drive me to justify behavior, that just, it's good things, but
That's right.
just fools.
Yeah, so in responsibility, by the way, should we be responsible people as men? I mean, we ever heard of the book of Proverbs? Yeah, we got a lot of responsibilities. But to your point, our real responsibility is to the King. Our real responsibility is to become reshaped in the image of Christ And sometimes in the name of I'm a responsible, hardworking man, we actually go far afield from what's good for us in Christ, and what's good for the people around us, therefore. So, well said. Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's a real one. And that's the tricky thing about some of these things is they can trick us into thinking, oh, you're really doing this good thing. It may be good, but if it's wrongly applied, then it's not good at all. Here, and then over here, and then back there. Go ahead.
I think it's a little bit along the same line when we are doing activities with our families. Those activities that we may be doing may be taking us further away from our godly responsibility
Yep.
to our family.
Yep. Good, good. Go ahead.
That sense of control or having, making our own decisions, self-determination. And like when he sent out the disciples, they had no control. There was no security there. And it's a trust. And
Yes.
if you're a disciple, you don't do things your way, you do things their way.
And part of that, taking up the cross. I mean, think about it. People who died on crosses, how much self-determination did they have? I mean, it was those Roman soldiers deciding where you were going to go. And it was them nailing you and then lifting you up and everybody mocking you. You weren't determining anything. Jesus says that's the life of a disciple. Somebody over here. Go ahead.
Acceptance pressure.
Talk about it.
Well, if you're young, most of the time you want to be accepted by others.
Yep.
Right? Whether you're in school or early in your job. I mean, I want to be part of the team. I want to be part of the group. Whatever, how you define that. Hopefully, as you age, you come to realize that that's not that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
Being accepted by others can certainly slowly suck you out of being a disciple.
How about these words from Jesus? Matthew 6 and verse 1. Beware of practicing your righteousness, maybe doing things like being real responsible, before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father. Why did they want to be noticed? To be accepted, to be embraced. You're a part of our team. You're a part of our thing. Yeah. We say the long prayers on the street corners. We make a show out of how terrible it is to fast and all this kind of stuff. He says, no. That will kill your discipleship. If you do even righteous things in order to be accepted socially, who is living? Is that Christ in you? Is Christ all and in all? No, I'm still alive. And by the way, my righteousness is only going to go so far as I'm accepted. Once I'm no longer accepted, I can't keep following Jesus anymore. Once it gets unpopular for me to behave in whatever way or not behave in whatever, I can't do it anymore. Because it was all about that acceptance. By the way, a good lesson for us as Christians, I think. I don't know. I've been hearing my whole life preachers say that we're going to start getting persecuted and thrown in prison and stuff. I am sure they're right. One day it's going to happen. I just don't know when it is. But I wonder which one of us are. Because here's the problem. Some of us are only really following Jesus because the culture around us is like, yeah, that's cool. I mean, I don't agree, but it's fine. We're pretty much the same. What about as it gets more and more different? Are we going to stay the course? Or are we going to start doing this? Social acceptance is a huge discipleship killer. Go.
So this may not be quite what we're asking for, but we'll say it anyway. So I've kind of noticed a trend where a lot of worldly people say we're not Christ-like because we don't follow Jesus, because we don't accept homosexuals and things of that nature, because Jesus was loving and accepting of all, but they ignore where it says in Matthew chapter 10, he didn't come to bring peace but a sword. So it's easy for us to ignore that if we want to be accepting of others too.
Sure, yeah. And that's there's a little more pronounced, right? That issue about sexual ethics and some of the movements that we're seeing in our generation. Of course, there's lots of examples of that. The way people think about money, the way people think about race, the way people think about... You go down the list of any number of issues that people of the world say one thing. Are we really actually standing out that much? Are we kind of like, oh, yeah, I don't agree with being a racist, but I'm not going to get on to you for saying that hateful thing about somebody because they look different than you. Or, oh, yeah, I'm not greedy, but yeah, well, I'm going to support the notion that, oh, it's good, greed is good, and more money. All these things. We cannot, y'all. We got to be different. I'm not talking we're just trying to run around here being weirdos on purpose, but get used to it. Jesus was a little strange. He could walk on water after all. And if you're going to follow in his footsteps, you're going to be a little strange out here. And we got to just get with that program, right? We could keep on going, but I'll just throw in a couple more that I think are really important for us. In the Sermon on the Mount, what are the first two ethical matters that Jesus addresses? Open book test, you can cheat if you want. After he kind of gives the basic characteristics and the Beatitudes, and then there's the, you're the light of the world thing, and hey, by the way, let me explain what I'm doing with the Old Testament, and, don't get mad, and maybe you'll get mad, whatever, I don't care, here's the deal. When he starts getting into some specific practices, sin traps, what are the first two he talks about? Murder, and what does he really say about murder? What's he really concerned about? Anger. Is that a problem for us as men? You got any issues with anger? So I was making a list, just top of the dome. Like, what do I think are some things? And honestly, it's pretty much the same list as you guys. And I was actually thinking, you know what? The Sermon on the Mount is kind of this outline of some of the things that have to be, some of the giants that have to be slayed. So I was just doing it. You know which one I skipped? It's literally the first one on the list in my memory. By the way, I've been preaching the Sermon on the Mount recently. This is very top of mind for me. I've been thinking about it a lot. Skipped right over anger. What do you think the devil's doing with me, trying to kill my discipleship? What's the next one? Lust. How are we doing, guys? You got any issues with that? Any problems with the way you're using your computer or your smartphone? Any problems with the way you think about women when you're just out and about or in the privacy of your own home? And I don't care, married or unmarried, young or old. Old men, don't be ashamed to ask for help to overcome this sin. Young men certainly don't, but I'm afraid some of our older brothers who've been trapped in this may think that's a young man's sin. I'm not allowed to ask for any help with that. Listen, we got to be killing sin, or sin will stay killing us. You know what I mean? These things will kill us, and we will not be shaped in the image of Christ. None of the beautiful things that God has intended for us as men to become will happen. We will not be strong. We'll be weakened more and more every day, especially as we pretend to be good boys. Out here fighting the good fight and quoting the Bible verses. If we don't deal with these things that are corrosive from the inside out, anxiety and greed and lust and anger and a desire for acceptance and a desire for acceptance on a social level, and all these things we've been talking about. And how about, can I add in a couple more? With all of these, if you're going to be a disciple, Luke throws in the detail in that quote that we read from Matthew 16 earlier. He needs to take up his cross, and you remember the little word Luke uses to modify? Daily. Daily. You ever think, you know what? I don't think it's going to happen today. I just don't want to. You do that on your job sometimes, right? I'm sure some of y'all, you take a day off. I'm just tired, Now, sometimes being tired, you got to rest, all right? Rest is good, right? Jesus did say the Sabbath was made for man, okay? But a great temptation for us in our decadent, over-entertained, over-comfortable culture is to become lazy. To not be, I forgot who it was that pointed this out, but being a disciple requires discipline. And really all of these things that we've talked about, if we become lazy, passive, laid back, the devil will pounce on us, and Christ will not be all and in all of our lives. We'll just be right back to where we started eventually. And it all comes back to exactly what the brother shared at the very top. Pride. Thinking that I'm the master of my fate. I'm the commander running this ship. No, we are not. The little cartoon I heard somebody talk about when I was a kid, and I've gone and looked at them from sometimes. I think it's Pogo, He has a little quote. We have met the enemy, and he is us. We have met the enemy, and he is us. That's the real killer of discipleship. So what does Jesus say about that? Matthew 16. We read this earlier, and I'd like to unpack a couple of ideas that I think will help us. I hope that as we talked about those discipleship killers, you're thinking seriously about your own life. It may be a bunch of those things that are problems for you and challenges for you. It may just be one or two. I don't know. But I hope I'm taking it seriously. The devil is out here trying to get me off of following Jesus. The devil wants me to become more and more like myself, more and more like every other man who's trying to become more of himself and less like Christ. How do we combat that? What's it going to take? Matthew 16, starting in verse 13, what's the conversation about? I know many of you have read this many times, a familiar one for those who read the Bible. Well, what's the conversation? What are we talking about starting in verse 13? Who is Jesus? And of course, what a great conversation. Hey, who do people say that I am? I wonder if at this point the disciples were like, oh boy, here we go. Okay, don't mess up. Peter, go ahead. You always talk first anyways. Just get it out of the way. And so then they say, well, some people say this, that, and the third thing. And then Jesus asked the question he was really going for. Who do you say that I am? And then, what does Simon Peter say? Verse 16. You are Messiah, the one we've been hoping and dreaming for, the ones the scriptures have spoken about for centuries, our King, our Redeemer, the Christ, the Son of the living God. How do we discipline ourselves to take up the cross, to have a Christoformed life through a cruciformed life? How's this going to happen? It's going to happen through real belief in the absolute sovereignty of Jesus. That's what this statement is. You are the Christ. Jesus is the anointed one, the one that God promised, who would rule the kingdom of God to bring about peace and justice, who would rule on David's throne. That phrase, the Son of the living God, that took it all the way back to the promise made to David in 2 Samuel 7, that your son will be my son and he'll reign on a throne forever and all this kind of business. All right, so whenever Peter says this, he's saying, Jesus, you are King of kings and Lord of lords, as it would be said in the book of Revelation. If I'm going to take up my cross and follow Jesus, I've got to really, 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 really deep down in my heart believe in the absolute sovereignty of Jesus. And not in some sort of abstract way, but to understand his sovereign authority over me. Me. Whenever you set your budget, what determines that? Whenever you're going through all your finances and how you're going to spend your money, who's the person you're checking with? Is it your financial planner, your spouse, yourself? You know the first person you check with? Your King. Whenever you're getting ready to react, we would say respond, but react. Whenever someone mistreats you or slights you at work and you're deciding how you're going to properly respond to them. Who do you check with about what to do? You might ask your friends who have similarly been mistreated. You might just hold your own counsel while you're driving home, and when you're driving to work the next day, who is the person who is the only person that gets to dictate, as a dictator, how you're going to behave? The King, Jesus. And he is that, by the way. I know that's a dirty word. We don't say that. We don't say dictator. That is what Jesus is. He is the absolute sovereign. He is the dictator of your life. When it comes to how you're raising your kids and the priorities you're setting in their lives, are you deciding based on the things that you never did that you wish your kids would be able to accomplish and do? Are you deciding, or are you turning to the King? You understand what I'm saying? Believing in Jesus the King doesn't mean I love singing those songs about it. We should love singing the songs about it. But it's a slap in the face when we come in places like this and we sing the songs and we say amen to the prayers of Jesus ruling our lives and all that kind of business, but then we go about our lives living however we want, brothers. It's not right. And I know because of our pride, we want to be big boys who know how to run the show and know how to do things right. That's not the deal anymore for us. Because the King has come and his kingdom has been made available to us. What a shock. And yet we run away from it to build our little sandcastles for our own little kingdoms that are just going to get washed out to sea. If you want to really follow Jesus, taking up the cross to follow him, it starts with a real, true, deep belief that he is the absolute sovereign over my life. Keep going in the text. We've already touched on this, but it bears repeating again. Right after Jesus is revealed as the Christ, and he talks a little bit about his kingdom purposes, he talks about how he's going to build that kingdom, starting in verse 21. He began to tell them how he was going to be betrayed and die and all that sort of thing. And then, of course, Peter didn't like that one little bit, because Peter, I think, probably understood that if the king is going to suffer and be betrayed and die, what does that mean for us? After all, Jesus had already said, if they called the ruler of the house Beelzebul, what do you think they're going to do to you? Peter's doing the math, I think. Wait a second. If you're the king and you're going to suffer and die, what does that mean for all of us? Verse 24, what does Jesus say? Once again, Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself. He must deny himself. If we're going to really follow Jesus, if we're going to really be formed into the image of Christ, we're going to have to learn to embrace the denial and total loss of ourself. Now, I know this is kind of weird and kind of tricky. Just read the letters of Peter, Paul, and John. They're all still human beings who have their own little personalities and their own little experiences and their own little stuff, okay? So it's not that we all become these robots as disciples of Christ, all uniformly thinking and saying every exact same thing. We all have the same exact jobs. That's not what we're talking about here, but you understand. I can't keep on just embracing myself as the guide for my life. I'm not the end goal here anymore. I don't exist. What did Paul say? It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. Denial and total loss of self. Because I've pledged myself to Jesus the King. And that's actually the next thing here. Keep on going here in verse 24. He must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Of course, that take up the cross bit goes with the self-denial, the loss of self. That's what happened. Whenever you got hung up on a cross, you were lost socially, obviously physically. You would actually die. But then Jesus says, but let's be clear. I'm not talking about you guys actually getting nailed on a piece of wood. Maybe that's where this thing will go. But I'm talking about you following me. So the third thing, if it starts with belief in the absolute sovereignty of Jesus, that which carries us into a denial and total loss of ourselves, that's going to require a complete and consistent allegiance to Jesus. Y'all know that word faith that we talk about so much. That's the victory that overcomes the world. That's what it means. It means you've pledged your allegiance to Jesus the King and to the kingdom that he built. One nation under God, the true one nation under God. That's what we pledge our allegiance to. That's what we follow every day. Wherever he leads, that's where I'll follow. Wherever he goes. And I don't really know where that's going to be always. When he tells me to forgive that coworker, turn the other cheek, where's that going to lead, Jesus? That's not really for me to decide. It's my job to be loyal. And the king told me to turn the other cheek, to not be angry. But Jesus, if I don't fulfill these sexual cravings that I have, what's that going to do for my sense of manhood and my... Well, doesn't matter. Cut off your hand and pull out your eye, whatever it takes. You be loyal to the king and what he said. Jesus, if I do what you say, I'm going to be rejected. I'm not going to be accepted by my peers, by my coworkers. I'm going to be... I know. Follow me, Jesus says. Complete and consistent loyalty. And I say consistent because you know somebody who is completely loyal to Jesus, I should say? He left his nets. He said on an occasion, we left all to follow you. Simon Peter, except for that moment when he said, I don't think I'm going to do this anymore. Do you know him? Instead of denying himself, what did Peter do? He denied Jesus. Instead of doing what Jesus said, pray that you may not enter into temptation, Peter slept. He was the Lord of his own decisions in that moment. And no surprise, he didn't keep on following Jesus. He didn't keep on staying loyal in his allegiance. Brothers, we have to Believe in the sovereignty of Jesus. Give up ourselves. Take my life and let it be consecrated to you, Lord. That's the way we've got to be, so that we'll be completely and consistently pledged in our allegiance to Jesus, our King. I'm going to pause there. I got one more brief thing I want to say, but I want to open it up. What do you guys want to say about these thoughts? I know I got preachy there for a second. Sorry about that. It happens sometimes. But what do y'all want to say about this? How does this passage help us? What challenges you here? What confronts you? When you think about those discipleship killers and then this challenge that Jesus lays down to us, what comes to mind here? Go ahead, brother.
Matthew 16:15, and Jesus says, "But who do you say that I am?"
Right.
Someone comes to our door. What do we want to know? Who are you and why should I let you in? Isn't that what God is going to ask each one of us? Who do they say you are? While you were on the earth and you were living your life, who do they say that you are? Are you one of my followers? Are you someone who's living their life for me? Am I the Lord of your life? Or are you living your life for you?
And the even scarier thing is, according to what Jesus says about his portrayal of Judgment Day, whenever we get there, even if we say, well, everybody said, I cast out demons in your name and I did many mighty deeds and I call you Lord. And he's going to say, yeah, but I know what's going on inside of you. You're not really loyal to me. You're workers of lawlessness. So this is, you're exactly right. This is where it's all going, and this is why it's so important. Go ahead.
Then when you asked earlier about us to think about if we're non-Christian, what would we write on our sins? And I was just thinking about epitaphs on tombstones,
Yep.
on gravestones. You don't go into any cemetery, you walk around, and none of them say, owner of a multi-million-dollar home, earned $2 million a year, have 5 cars, 2 boats, a lake house. You don't see any of that. They want to know. They don't say loving father, husband, grandfather, whoever it may be. I mean, nobody wants to be left the word about them for their heritage to be known that they were other than someone that was good, even bad people. So far be it for us as Christians to be living our lives and not recognizing the devil who is so active in this world and who is little by little pulling us away from God. Because as Kenneth said earlier, many things we do are not sinful in themselves. And so we look at it that way and say it's not a bad thing. But then if it occupies all of our time, we don't have time for God. We don't have time to do the things that we should do to encourage our fellow Christians and be an example of those who aren't. It becomes sinful.
And what good was all that stuff that we did?
In the end, as the old saying goes, there's no U-Hauls behind a hearse. And people in the cemetery, they're going out the same way they came in with nothing, other than they should hopefully they have a saved soul.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, that's a great quote, right? There's no U-Hauls behind hers. But there are monuments to people's lives in cemeteries. There's a really old cemetery in Brooklyn that has, people from a super long time ago passed away. Man, some of those tombstones are fancy schmancy, humongous. Genuinely, they're monuments to these people. And maybe they were great Christians. I don't know. That's the thing, I don't know. Because their life's over, and there's nothing left of them except a kind of fancy rock that's got a bunch of moss on it. What's going to happen next? We got to be thinking about this seriously, y'all. And there's so many pulls on us as men to value different things. There's only one thing that we need to keep at the center of it all.
I think, struggle I know for me and maybe a lot of others is perspective. We get easy to get caught up in this life that we live here, the validation we receive from it, the things we get involved with, and to not keep our perspective eternal.
Yep.
Because the validation is part of it that we have a hard time maintaining.
Yep. Amen. Amen. Great. Go ahead.
I
I would suspect not also.
English idiom today. We hear
Right.
that. We hear, okay, I've got a burden to bear. There's certain things that I've got to do. I've got to carry my cross. But when Jesus said it, I suspect they're hearing those words from a Roman perspective of literal men, prisoners,
Criminals,
bad guys, criminals,
outcasts.
carrying a cross, their own cross, that they're going to be crucified on. And so for Jesus to say, to be my disciple, you have to take up your cross and follow me. I can't understand what must have been going through their head. That's just a totally new phrase for them. To us, it's not unusual. We understand that. But for them, for Jesus to say, to be my disciple, you have to take up your cross and follow me. That had to be the most radical thing that they had ever heard in their stinking lives up to that point.
Precisely.
This
Yep.
is the guy that I'm going to be following. He's the Messiah. And he's telling me I got to, wait a minute, take up a cross and follow him. What in the world are you talking about?
Yep.
How radical of a thing that is to ask. I mean, it's like he's begging them not to follow him.
That is actually what he's doing, yeah. And like Paul would say, the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us, it's the wisdom and the power of God. And what is it? So here's what I want us to do, y'all. I want you to give me 5 minutes for us to wrap this thing up. If we're going to be shaped in the image of Christ, we're going to really follow Jesus and embrace the identity of discipleship, we have to learn this: the full self-sacrifice of taking up the cross. And earlier, whenever we tried to catalog some of the discipleship killers, especially for men perhaps, for all people, but especially for men, the first one that was mentioned, I'm so glad it was the first one, was pride. Like you flip over Matthew chapter 18. What is the underlying fundamental quality that we have to cultivate? I'm going to give you the quality, and I'm going to give you one practical command that our King gives us to cultivate this quality. If you care about following Jesus, if you care about bearing his image, if you care about taking up your cross daily so that you can be raised up with him in newness of life on the last day, you got to care about this. Matthew 18, verse 1. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and said, "Hey, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" I wonder if there was a long, pregnant pause. Jesus doesn't say anything, or he doesn't answer the question, I should say. But what does he do? And he called a child to himself and set the child before them. I wonder if the child was like, what's going on? You're going to spit on me? I've heard you spit on people sometimes wherever you're doing stuff. What is the deal here? And Jesus said, "Truly I say to you, unless you are converted and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." What does it mean to become like children? Verse 4, "Whoever then humbles himself as this child makes himself insignificant, not noticed, not powerful, not really able to even take care of himself." That's what it means to be humble like a child. Y'all know children can actually be pretty stubborn pretty quick. Some of us were pretty stubborn pretty quick. I don't know if you remember that when you were a child, but we can do that. But the real humility of children is their absolute need for someone to care for them. Their absolute ignorance and foolishness where they pretty quickly hit a wall, pick me up, take care of me. Jesus says, "Whoever humbles himself as this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." It may be in the very same opening or on the next page, chapter 19 and verse 13, he says essentially the same thing. "Then some children were brought to him so that he might lay his hands on them and pray, and the disciples rebuked him." Get those kids out of here. Jesus got important stuff to do. Verse 14, "But Jesus said, hey, let the children alone, and do not hinder them from coming to me, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." We've got to learn childlike humility if we're going to believe in the sovereignty of Jesus. If we're going to deny ourselves and completely lose ourselves to him. If we're going to maintain a consistent and complete commitment and allegiance to Jesus our King, we have to stop thinking we're running the show. We got to stop thinking we're all grown up. We are not. We got to adopt the spirit of Solomon, who whenever he bowed his knees before God, he said, I'm like a little child. I don't know how to go out or how to come in. How did John the aged, write those letters? Little children. Little children. That's what he says we are. Why do you think he thought that? Because he knows that's the mind of the person who's going to be shaped by Christ, who's going to continue on being a disciple. We've got to learn that kind of humility, brothers. We got to quit acting like we know how to run this thing. I'm not saying be dumb when you have wisdom. Thank God for your wisdom and execute your wisdom and lead us as Christ is leading you. But let's not ever think that we're the ones running this show. Now, how do we cultivate it? Go back to chapter 18, verse 5. Jesus, how do I become humble like that? Let me give you something practical to do. And whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. Jesus also gives the opposite. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea. By the way, most of those discipleship killers we talked about are ways we could cause others to stumble. But what's the way Jesus says that we cultivate humility? Paul would say it a little bit differently in Romans chapter 12. Associate with the lowly. Associate with the lowly. This is the part where none of us are going to talk to each other after this, because you're like, wait a second, am I lowly here? Or are you talking to me because I'm the... But think about it in your life. Do you like palling around with the powerful people, the important people, the smart people, the beautiful people, the rich people, the people that you get stuff out of? Or do you think, you know what, I belong at the kids' table? When we lived in Atlanta, there was a brother there who, actually one time we went to his house. My friend Corey, we were walking up. He's a really country guy from Alabama. And he said, never eaten lunch at a billionaire's house before. I was like, yeah, this is a nice neighborhood. He's like, no, dude, seriously, this guy has a Wikipedia page. I was like, what? And he was. This guy was big time, right? He helped invent hospital beds or something. I don't know. Anyways, this guy was a big deal. One time we had a potluck at our house. And Emily went down because one of the kids had, spilled something on the floor. And she went down, and there's all the kids, and she looked over in the corner, and there's that brother sitting on a little kid's chair. You know what I'm talking about? The little kiddie chairs. With his little paper plate, eating his potluck food. He was receiving the children. We've got to learn that kind of humility, y'all. And I don't mean just with kids, but learn to associate with the lowly. Don't set your mind on the high things, being important and powerful and strong and all that kind of stuff. Receive those who are weak. Receive those who are lowly. Receive those who are humble. Because that's your people if you're going to be a follower of Jesus. God bless y'all. Thanks for this good discussion tonight. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. We're going to talk about some of the more practical executions of some of these things that it takes to follow after Jesus. I appreciate your good attention and participation. Y'all have helped me, and I hope the things we talked about have built us all up to follow after Jesus.